The call came in at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning. My coworker found me face down on the parking garage floor, my phone still in my hand, a half-eaten granola bar beside me. I had been awake for 31 hours straight. I had a presentation at 9. I never made it. I woke up in a hospital bed with an IV in my arm and a blood pressure cuff squeezing my left wrist every 15 minutes. A nurse with kind eyes told me I had collapsed from severe exhaustion and dangerously high blood pressure. She said the paramedics were worried I had stroked. She said I was lucky. I didn't feel lucky. I always felt like I had failed to hold everything together perfectly enough. My mother arrived at the hospital around noon. She walked in fast, her heels clicking on the linoleum, and before she even looked at the monitors or asked the nurse a single question, she pulled a chair close to my bed, sat down, and said, "Nora, we need to talk about Jade's venue deposit." That was the first thing she said to me. Not "Are you okay?" Not "I was so scared when I heard." Not "I love you." The venue deposit for my younger sister's wedding. $4,500. Due in 11 days. I closed my eyes. My father stood near the window scrolling his phone. He glanced over once, gave me a tight smile, and said, "You gave us a scare, kid." Then he went back to scrolling. This was my family. This had always been my family. I just hadn't admitted it out loud until I was lying in a hospital bed with compression socks on my legs and a cardiologist scheduled for the following morning. I had been sending money home since I was 23 years old. My first real job, marketing coordinator, $41,000 a year in a city where a studio apartment cost me $1,600 a month. I was barely surviving, but my parents called and said the electric bill was behind, so I sent $300. Then my sister needed new textbooks, so I sent another $200. Then my father's car needed new brakes. Then my mother wanted to take a pottery class and couldn't justify the cost. Then Jade's spring break trip with her friends. Then, and then, and then. 8 years of then. I had never done the math out loud. I was too afraid of what I would find. But somewhere in the back of my mind, in the place I didn't let myself visit very often, I knew the number was significant. I knew it was the down payment on a house I didn't have. I knew it was the emergency fund I was always one crisis away from desperately needing. I had moved up steadily. Marketing coordinator became marketing manager, became senior brand strategist at a mid-sized firm outside of Chicago. By 32, I was earning a salary that sounded impressive at dinner parties. By 32, I also had less than $4,000 in savings, because every time I built a cushion, something came up at home. Jade's wedding had been the latest chapter. She was 26, marrying a man named Derek, whose parents made it very clear early on that they were not in a position to contribute significantly to the wedding costs. My parents made it equally clear that they had sacrificed everything for their daughters, and surely Nora, who was doing so well, could help make Jade's day special. I had already sent $22,000 over 8 months. For the venue deposit, the catering tasting fees, the dress, the engagement photos, the bridal shower my mother organized at a hotel because someone had mentioned that backyard showers felt cheap. $22,000, and the wedding was still 9 months away. Lying in that hospital bed, I thought about the number 22,000. I thought about it slowly, the way you examine something you've been avoiding looking at directly. The venue needs a decision by the 15th, my mother said. She was using her patient voice, the one she deployed when she had already decided the answer and was waiting for me to arrive at it on my own. Jade has her heart set on this place. You've seen the pictures. I'm in the hospital, Mom. I know that, honey. I know. And we're so glad you're okay. But the 15th doesn't move. She paused. Could you do a transfer tonight? Or tomorrow at the latest? I can send you the account number again. I looked at the IV in my arm. I looked at the monitor tracking my heart rate. I thought about the cardiologist scheduled for the morning, and I said, I need to rest right now. My mother nodded like I had said something reasonable but slightly inconvenient. My father said he was going to find coffee, and that was the visit. 20 minutes, one financial request, no questions about my prognosis. They came back the next morning together, and my father sat down this time and held my hand for a while, which felt genuine. And I let myself believe that maybe the day before had just been shock, that they had been scared and handled it badly. People handle fear badly. I knew that. Then my mother said that she and my father and Jade had tickets for a long weekend in Scottsdale. They had booked it 2 months ago for Jade's birthday. They were leaving Thursday. It was now Wednesday afternoon. We looked into changing the flights, my father said. He said it with the particular tone of a man who had looked into nothing. Non-refundable. I'm still in the hospital, I said. The doctor said you're stable, my mother said. Stable means you're not in danger. You just need rest. You can rest here. They'll take good care of you. I'm scheduled for more tests Friday. We'll be back Sunday night, she said. That's only 3 days. Jade hadn't said a word yet. She was standing near the door, looking at her phone. She was wearing new shoes. I noticed the shoes because I had sent money the previous month for what my mother described as a few necessities Jade needs before the wedding season starts. I hadn't asked for an itemized list. I never asked for an itemized list. That was my mistake. One of 1,000 mistakes that had compounded over 8 years into the situation I was currently in, lying in a hospital bed with a malfunctioning heart while my family discussed their travel plans. Jade, I said. She looked up. Do you want to stay? A pause. Something moved across her face that I couldn't fully read. Then my mother said, briskly, Jade has a venue walkthrough scheduled for Saturday. That's why this trip matters. As if the venue walkthrough justified everything. As if Jade's calendar was the organizing principle of our family's moral universe. Jade looked back at her phone. They left Thursday morning. I know because the day nurse, a woman named Patricia, who had become something like a small bright spot in my days, told me my family had stopped by very early to say goodbye and I had been asleep and they hadn't wanted to wake me. Patricia said it the way you say something when you're trying to be kind about something unkind. She brought me extra pudding that afternoon without my asking. I had a lot of time to think, those first few days alone. The tests on Friday were inconclusive enough that my cardiologist wanted to extend my stay through the weekend. My blood pressure was still elevated. She used the phrase chronic stress response and looked at me steadily when she said it, like she was asking a question without asking it. I thought about the $22,000. I thought about the 8 years before that. I thought about being 23 in my first apartment, eating ramen and transferring money home, while my mother told her friends that Nora was doing wonderfully, so independent, always been the responsible one. The responsible one. I had been hearing that my entire life. Jade was the creative one, the sensitive one, the one who needed handling carefully. I was the responsible one. It took me until I was lying in a hospital bed at 32 to understand that responsible had been a costume they put on me very young, and I had worn it so long I forgot it wasn't my actual skin. Saturday night. I couldn't sleep. The hospital has a particular nighttime quality, quieter but never fully quiet, punctuated by soft footsteps and the occasional distant beeping. Around 11, I pressed the call button not because I needed anything medical, but because I was lonely in a way that felt physical, like a pressure behind my sternum. The night nurse who came in was someone I hadn't met yet. His name tag said Marcus. He was efficient and kind, and while he was checking my IV line, he mentioned, almost as an aside, that I had a visitor earlier that evening. Visiting hours end at 8, I said. He knew that, Marcus said. He waited in the lobby for a while. He comes most evenings, actually. He asks about you at the desk, and then sits in the lobby for an hour or so, and leaves. He looked at me carefully. He said he didn't want to intrude, but he wanted to be nearby. His name is Daniel. He said he's your uncle. I went very still. I have an uncle, my father's younger brother. His name is Daniel, and I haven't seen him since I was 11 years old. He and my father had what my mother always described as a falling out, spoken in a tone that made clear the subject was permanently closed. I had asked about it exactly twice in my childhood, and both times the conversation ended so abruptly and coldly that I learned, the way children learn these things, not to ask a third time. I knew Daniel existed the way you know a fact, without knowing what to do with it. A peripheral presence, a name that occasionally surfaced in the vague way of things that have been deliberately buried. Is he here now? I asked. He left about an hour ago, Marcus said. I can leave a message at the desk if you want him to come up tomorrow. I said yes. I said it before I had time to think about whether it was wise. He came the next afternoon, Sunday. I heard him in the hallway before I saw him, a low voice asking the nurse something. Then he appeared in the doorway, and I recognized him immediately despite the year's same jawline as my father, but something softer in the face, something that hadn't been pressed into the same tight shape. He was carrying a coffee from the hospital cafeteria and a manila envelope. He stood in the doorway for a moment, like he wasn't certain of his welcome. "You don't have to stand there," I said. He came in and sat in the chair my mother had occupied 5 days earlier. He looked at the monitors for a moment, the IV, the compression socks. Something passed across his face. "I heard you collapsed," he said. "Small collapse," I said. "I'm mostly fine." "You don't look mostly fine." "No," I agreed. "I guess I don't." He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. He seemed to be deciding something, choosing a place to begin in a story that had a lot of potential starting points. Finally, he said, "I've been watching your career. From a distance. I know that sounds strange. I followed your LinkedIn, your company's website. I saw the promotions." He paused. "I was proud of you. I didn't have a right to say it, but I was. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing." "I also know what's been happening," he said. "With your parents. With the money." The room got very quiet in the way rooms get when someone says the thing that has been unsaid for a long time. "I don't know what you think you know," I said carefully. "I know more than you do," he said. "That's why I'm here." He set the manila envelope on the tray table beside my bed. He didn't push it toward me or open it. He just set it there and let it exist between us. "I need to tell you something about your grandparents," he said. "My parents. Your father's parents." He paused. "You were close to my mother. You used to call her Grandma June." Grandma June. I felt something move in my chest. She had died when I was 14. I remembered her hands, the smell of her kitchen, the way she called me her best girl. I remembered crying at her funeral while my father stood very straight and dry-eyed beside me, and my mother rubbed my back and said to compose myself. "After my mother died," Daniel said, "she left behind a will. In that will, she designated a portion of her estate, specifically for you, not for the family generally. For you. By name. She set up a custodial account. The intent was that the funds would transfer to you when you turned 21. I was very still. Your grandfather enforced it after she passed," he said. "He was very specific about honoring her wishes. He died when you were 19. He looked at me steadily. "After he died, your father became the executor of the remaining estate." The word executor landed in the room with the weight of everything I was starting to understand. "The account had $63,000 in it," Daniel said. I heard the number. I heard it the way you hear something in a dream, where the significance is enormous but the processing is slow. "It never transferred to me," I said. "It wasn't a question." "No," he said. "It didn't." He opened the envelope then. Not dramatically, just methodically, the way you do something you have been preparing to do for a long time. He laid documents on the tray table. Bank records. A copy of my grandmother's will, pages flagged with small yellow tabs. A letter from an estate attorney dated 3 years after my grandfather's death, addressed to my father. Account closure documentation. I looked at the papers for a long time without touching them. "He closed the account," I said. 8 months after your grandfather died," Daniel said. "You had just turned 20. A year before you would have had legal access to it." He paused. "I found out 2 years later. I confronted your father about it. That's the falling out your mother always referenced." His voice was even, not bitter. Just factual, in the way of someone who has had a long time to arrive at acceptance. He told me it was family money, that it had gone toward family needs, and that what happened in his household was none of my business. I thought about the day I got my first paycheck. I thought about the first time my mother called and said they were a little short this month. I thought about $22,000 for a wedding. I thought about 8 years of being the responsible one. I had been filling a hole that my father had already emptied. "Why didn't you come to me earlier?" I asked. My voice was steady, which surprised me. "I tried," he said. "When you were 22, I sent a letter to your apartment. Your mother called me 2 days later and told me to stay away from her daughter, that I was a troublemaker trying to create division in their family." He looked at his coffee. I thought about pushing harder. I didn't. I'm not sure I made the right call. He looked up. When I heard you had collapsed, I decided it didn't matter anymore whether it was comfortable. You needed to know. I picked up the copy of my grandmother's will. The paper was slightly worn at the folds, like it had been handled and refolded many times. I found the relevant section. The language was formal, legal, but my grandmother's intention was unmistakable. She had loved me specifically. She had wanted to give me something specific. She had written my name into her final wishes so that I would have it. I thought about Grandma June and her kitchen and the way she used to hold my face in her hands and look at me like I was worth looking at. Is any of this recoverable? I asked. That's a question for an attorney, Daniel said. A good one. But the documentation is all there. The will is registered. The account closure has a paper trail. He paused. I've kept copies of everything for 12 years. I was waiting for the right moment, or the right version, of courage. He gave me a small, rueful look. I'm sorry it took your being in a hospital bed. My parents came back Sunday evening. I heard them in the hallway before they appeared. My mother's voice saying something about the flight being delayed. My father responding. Jade saying nothing audible. They came through the door carrying the particular slightly too cheerful energy of people who know they behaved badly and are hoping to move past it on forward momentum. My mother had a gift bag. Scottsdale mints and a candle that smelled like desert sage. You look better, she said, studying my face. You have more color. I had a visitor today, I said. Something shifted in her expression, barely perceptible. A micro-adjustment, like a camera lens refocusing. Oh, she said. My uncle, I said. Dad's brother Daniel. The room went very quiet. My father had been setting his jacket on the chair, and he stopped with the jacket half draped, his back partially to me, and he stayed in that position for a moment too long. What did he want? My father said. Not a question. The flatness of someone absorbing a blow while deciding how to respond to it. To talk to me, I said. He told me about Grandma June's will. My mother set the gift bag down on the windowsill with a very deliberate motion. Nora, she said. Whatever Daniel told you. He showed me the documents, I said. The will. The account records. The closure date. I looked at my father, who had finally turned around. She left $63,000 for me specifically. I turned 20 a year later, and it was already gone. My father looked older suddenly. It happened in real time, right in front of me, like something structural had shifted under his face. That money kept this family afloat during a very hard time, he said finally. So did I said. For 8 years. That's different, is it? My mother made a sound that was half protest, half something she stopped herself from saying. Jade was standing near the door again, same position as the first day. And I looked at her, and this time, she didn't look away. She looked back at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Something uncomfortable. Something that might, if given the right conditions, eventually become honest. I didn't say anything else that night. I was tired in a way that felt geological, like it went down through multiple layers. I told them I needed to sleep and they left, and I lay in the dark listening to the night sounds of the hospital, and I didn't cry. I had expected to cry and I didn't. I felt something else instead, something quieter and more durable. The cardiologist cleared me for discharge on Monday. She said it again before I left. Chronic stress response. And this time she added, whatever is driving the stress needs to change. Not moderate adjustment. Fundamental change. Your body is telling you something it's been trying to tell you for a long time. I asked her how she would know when something had fundamentally changed. She smiled, just slightly. You'll feel it, she said. It feels like breathing correctly after a long time of not. I called Daniel from the car on the way home. I told him I wanted the name of his attorney. I spent the following 2 weeks in a state of very organized calm. I filed a formal inquiry through a probate and estate attorney Daniel recommended, a woman named Carol who had short gray hair and a manner of speaking that made me feel like the world was made of comprehensible systems that responded to documentation. She reviewed the materials, asked questions in a precise, unhurried way, and told me at the end of our second meeting that she believed we had a strong basis for a civil claim. I sent my parents an email. Not a phone call, because phone calls could be interrupted, redirected, and reframed in real time by my mother's particular skills. An email, composed carefully over 3 drafts, that said I was aware of what had happened with the estate account, that I was working with an attorney, and that, effective immediately, I would no longer be providing financial support of any kind. I copied Carol. My mother called 7 times in the first hour after I sent it. I didn't answer. She left 3 voicemails. The first was disbelief. The second was anger, a version of anger that dressed itself as hurt. The third was a pivot to my father's voice, low and steady, saying that we should talk, that things could be explained, that family should handle things privately. I listened to all 3, and then I made a note for Carol. Jade called once. She waited 2 days before she called, which told me something. When I answered, there was a pause before she spoke, and when she did speak, she sounded different, less rehearsed. She said, "I didn't know about Grandma June's money." I believed her. I think I believed her because it was true, and also because I needed to believe something salvageable existed in the wreckage. "I know," I said. "Mom told me you were exaggerating," she said. "When I was growing up, she said you liked to help, that you offered." I thought. She stopped. I didn't ask questions because it was easier not to. "I know that too," I said. "I don't know what to do with Derek's family about the wedding," she said. "It wasn't a request. It was just her saying an honest thing. That's not my problem to solve," I said, gently, but clearly. Another pause. "Okay," she said finally. "Just that. Okay." We didn't have a triumphant reconciliation. We didn't have a tearful breakthrough. We said we would talk again, and we ended the call, and I sat in my apartment in the afternoon quiet and felt the shape of what my life had been and what it might become. The legal process moved forward in the methodical way of legal processes. I will not pretend it was clean or fast. There were exchanges through attorneys, a formal response from my father's side disputing the characterization of events, a counter-argument from Carol that referenced statute and precedent with a precision that felt almost comforting. My father called me once directly, bypassing Carol, and said that I was destroying the family. I told him he was holding me responsible for something he started. He didn't respond to that. He said we could work this out privately. I said the time for private resolution had passed by approximately 8 years, and I ended the call. I worked. I slept more than I had in years. I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Wallace, who had an office full of plants, and who listened to the full shape of everything without reframing it prematurely. In our 4th session, she asked me when I first understood that my role in the family was structural rather than relational, and I sat with that question for a long time before I said I thought I had always known and had simply never allowed myself to use that language. "What does it feel like to use it now?" she asked. "Accurate," I said. And then, after a moment, and also like something loosening, Daniel and I had dinner twice that spring. His wife made food from scratch, and they had 2 teenagers who were funny and loud, and I sat at their table and felt the strange, doubled sensation of grief and gratitude. Grief for the years of distance, gratitude that the distance hadn't become permanent. He told me stories about my grandmother that I hadn't heard, versions of her I was too young to have known. She had been formidable, he said. Warm but formidable. She had seen something in me early, he said, something she wanted to protect. I thought about her writing my name into her will with that specific intent. A woman who understood that money, given deliberately to the right person, could buy something that couldn't be bought any other way. Autonomy, time, options, the literal ability to say no and survive it. She had tried to give me that. It had been taken before I was old enough to hold it. And now, in my 32nd year, I was reconstructing it from scratch, piece by piece, in the way of someone building something they should have had all along. The settlement was finalized in late summer. I will not disclose the specific terms because they are private, but I will say that Carol was thorough and that the documentation Daniel had kept for 12 years was exactly as useful as she had hoped. It was not $63,000 plus 12 years of compound interest, but it was not nothing. It was enough to feel like an acknowledgement, enough to feel like my grandmother had finally succeeded, just decades late. I put a portion of it into savings and sat with the savings account balance for a full minute, looking at it. It was the largest number I had ever seen in an account that was entirely, unconditionally, mine. I called Daniel afterward, and he said, quietly, "She would have been glad." I thought about Grandma June holding my face in her hands. I thought about her calling me her best girl. I thought about a woman who saw what was coming before I was old enough to see it myself, and tried, in the limited way available to her, to leave me a door. I thought about Patricia, the nurse, and the extra pudding. I thought about Marcus at the night desk telling me about a man who sat in the lobby every evening, not wanting to intrude, just wanting to be nearby. I thought about Daniel's wife's kitchen and the loud teenagers and the particular quality of sitting at a table where no one needed anything from me. I thought about my cardiologist and the phrase breathing correctly after a long time of not. I had not fully understood what she meant when she said it. I understood now. It doesn't come all at once. The loosening, it happens in layers, across ordinary days, in the cumulative evidence of choices made without asking permission. Mornings that are entirely your own, months without a call that begins with "we need." You start to understand that the feeling you mistook for responsibility was something else, something installed in you before you were old enough to evaluate whether you wanted it. And you understand that removing something installed that early is not a single act, but a practice, a slow and necessary work. I'm still in that work. I imagine I will be for a while, but some mornings I wake up before my alarm, and the first thing I feel is not the list, not the weight, not the particular low-grade dread of the responsible one girding herself for another day of holding things together. Some mornings the first thing I feel is just quiet, just my own life, just my own breathing. My cardiologist was right. You know it when it happens. It feels like breathing correctly after a long time of not.